Hello and welcome to Exoconscious Humans YouTube channel. Today we have an, um, an exemplary person in the field of ufology, science, and physics, and we're so honored to have Dr. Rudy Schild with us today. Welcome, Rudy. Thank you so much for being with us. And a real quick announcement, really quickly, please subscribe to our channel, hit the button and subscribe. And also, if you want to be a part of our newsletter, go to Exoconscious Humans, that's plural.com, and join our newsletter for any updates of upcoming events that we'll have. I'm increasingly intrigued by plasma science and how that plays into quantum science and how the two interrelate and how one explains one aspect of reality, another explains another. Like Robert Temple came out with the book, A New Science of Heaven. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
Sorry, no.
Oh, okay. Actually, he was the first person to come out in terms of plasma science and begin to talk about it in a mainstream way that people could begin to understand, because plasma has an intelligence property to it. You know, he talks about these two massive plasma clouds that are outside of Earth. And then, of course, there's the Great Sloan Wall of the plasma wall, the Great Sloan Wall that's 137 billion light years away. But the reason it interests me is not just that aspect of the universe, but also the aspect of the fact that, you know, we hear a lot about junk DNA. Well, you know, we have mRNA that's going to change the genetics of our body, but we really don't know all about DNA. And so there's this crystalline property of our DNA that may be actually resonating with these plasma structures in the universe. And also, it may be a way of these plasma structures are communicating to us through our natural human DNA. And I just wondered how plasma science interrelates with quantum science.
Yes. So you've given me so much, it's hard to know where to break in. I would like to first pick up on the junk DNA, because I so fully agree with you. I believe that there is no junk DNA, that DNA is doing several things that people wouldn't know how to measure as easily as they can some other things that they do measure. DNA is doing things like resonating with the rest of the universe, and we can't know just how a strand of DNA. Now it's microscopic, but also if it stretches out, it gets big. So I'll call it microscopic anyway. So it's microscopic, but it has other magical properties more than just resonating with the universe. What it does is resonates with the quantum field as the source of life and plant growth. Now, this is something that is not widely understood. It will probably be news to you and therefore to your viewers. DNA is a three-dimensional structure, and the basic life form on Earth, the plant life, has a kind of a crystalline structure into it, where it's made up of three-dimensional structures called buckyballs or dodecahedrons. And I don't believe we have ever succeeded in making a molecular dodecahedron in a laboratory. And yet, it's the principal growth means of a plant. When plants decay, these buckyballs kind of collapse and morph into other structure, but the chemistry doesn't change. You get mixtures of carbon and hydrogen atoms, and we call them petroleum. Ancient plant DNA pools in giant pools underground. We call them oil wells. Now, this is a basic building stuff of the universe. The basic building mechanism or machinery of plants is the buckyball DNA growth. Now, it's so impossible to do it in a laboratory setting because it's a three-dimensional structure, and most laboratory work just deals with two-dimensional structures. That is, put two things together and an atom forms, and who cares what direction it's formed in? That can be random and an act of nature or of chance or who cares? But to make a three-dimensional structure, you have to have something like DNA, which can take, say, let's talk about food of substances in a plant are mixtures of water, hydrogen, and oxygen that come up through the stems of the plant onto the site where the growth is occurring. And now, because you have plant DNA there, it can arrange these atoms of hydrogen and carbon primarily into these buckyball structures because they themselves are three-dimensional strands of DNA. So that machinery would be perceived as some scientists as junk DNA because it doesn't carry signatures of disease or doesn't carry signatures of pathology. But what it does carry is signatures of life formation. It's very interesting that I'm writing a scientific paper right now with colleagues that show that there are clouds of this PAH petroleum floating around a young forming star. The star is called NGC 7027, and I discovered 40 years ago that one of the clouds has a different color that's in the sense of what happens if you have petroleum presence. It has a spectral signature of petroleum, or we could say the rainbow colors of petroleum. So this happens to be a cloud of what was a planet collision where a pool of petroleum leaked out into space, and now that's polluting space with petroleum or remnants of DNA and plant materials. So we now see in this object what's called panspermia, or the spread of life through the universe. And it's not an accident that when NASA sent up an experiment to sample just the dust that's around the Earth, it was called the Sampler mission, SAMPLER. And it was an acronym for something else, of course. It's always very clever. But it was called the Sampler mission. And what they did was expose the experiment to the dust and let it fly through the space within our solar system. And then at some point, the door closes again. The gel has now captured this stuff and gets parachuted back to Earth, taken to a laboratory, and the nature of the interstellar and interplanetary dust can now be examined firsthand. And a principal component seen in the Sampler mission was petroleum, tar-like stuff. Not only that, but We know that the opacity or the reflectance of the moon is very low because its surface is covered with this stuff, this petroleum that is just collected from space. And it now forms kind of a darkness in the dust where there should be a lighter um, uh, um, debris of ground up rocks, which is also part of the discovery of the sampler mission. They found stuff like we would call beach sand that's floating through space. So that's probably just ground up rocks from collisions of planets or of comets or junk that was bigger once and collided and made finer stuff. And now the finer stuff we're sampling with this mission. It's the most common stuff. So anyway, that's one exploration of space and just a modest expansion of your idea of junk DNA. Don't believe everything you hear about junk DNA. There's
Really, I
more
mean,
to it than that.
well, there's also the fascinating computer applications of storing information in DNA as a using DNA as a storage. So, you know,
That's correct.
there's that aspect. And also, I just wanted to add, we have an interview up on our channel with Jim Delatoso. Do you know Jim Delatoso?
Sorry, no.
Oh, okay. He did a lot of the original imaging research around the Phoenix Lights and different UFO craft, and he's just a fascinating man. And he now works with plant life and harmonics and how plants respond to harmonics. So it's fascinating work. But I want to switch gears here, okay, and if that's okay with you, and talk about what's happening in ufology today. I know we've touched on it some, but I wanted to especially come back to what's happening in ufology in relationship to the free survey. So why, in your opinion, hasn't the intelligence congressional investigation of UAP adopted a more consciousness-based approach? It seems like most of the headlines coming out of congressional investigations, or I don't know if you follow UFO Twitter, it's this continual drumbeat of UAP is a threat and we have to be careful. And I know just yesterday, Jim Simivan and Tom DeLonge were talking about they're in our universe and they're a threat. And you know, when you juxtapose that message along, and I know there's reasons for that message, I get that. But when you juxtapose that to what the free survey turned up, and that was maybe 70% of the people who were experiencers said that they would not only repeat the experience again of contact, but that it was peaceful and positive. So how do we, who've been in this field a long time, reconcile these two missions? And why is it you think that consciousness is void in the discussion?
Yes. So all I can say is that it's hard to know how the whole web of science research, military research, industrial manufacture, and weapons research and development interplay with each other. And that's what goes through the media. And there's not much, how should I say, much funding needed to do psychological research, but it's a big military budget matter to justify the expense of our space program. And I want to tell you that when I, in 2016, saw those releases from the military pilots, heroes, I said to my wife, I'll bet you anything that within 5 years, where I heard in the release in the New York Times the threat word mentioned 3 times. I counted them, anticipating that this would happen. How much do you want to bet that there will be a budget item within 5 years for a $100 billion space-based anti-missile program going to Boeing Aerospace?
Wow.
So that's why I say it's hard for us to know what the interplay behind the scenes, behind the veil, behind the curtain of the whole military industrial complex and the funding and how all of that works. But you could see its operation in that first famous New York Times press release article.
Our exoconscious community actually wrote a response to that the extraterrestrial presence was an opportunity and not a threat.
Excellent. I applaud you for that. And have you had any reaction to that?
None whatsoever.
Okay.
But that's okay. And I think, I'm so glad you're speaking with us today, because it's very difficult for us to maneuver through, us as an experiencer community, to really know how to maneuver through this. I know, I having been in this field for a long time, the CIA is always kind of, or the intel or the military is always floating floating in the background. I mean, you spoke about your relationship with John Mack, and so I worked with a woman named Dr. Ruth Hover, and she was part of John's original first peer group of people that were looking at experiencers and trying to find out what was the healthiest way, as John was doing, what was the healthiest way to help to integrate these people, which has really become my life work also. But then when I explored a little bit through the history of Harvard at that time, Henry Murray was running the psychological department, and he was running the MK Ultra program for the CIA. At the same time as you and John were working on it's sort of like these you called them bubbles earlier, but I mean, gee, if you read some of the things that Henry Murray wrote, you're just aghast at how he regarded humanity, and how could he possibly have been running the psychology department? Well, he was running the psychology department because this university was getting a big grant from military intel to run these programs. And so how do we maneuver this? I mean, it's kind of like, going back to your example of the flash of light that you see when you're an experiencer. I also think that when you're an experiencer, you also see things that other people don't see about how the actual working of life is happening politically, economically, sociologically, culturally. It's something to navigate. And I wonder what kind of advice you have.
Frankly, I have to ask myself these questions every day when I get up. How am I going to just run my own life? I don't pretend to be running the world. But I have to be very careful that I don't offend my university. They still give me library privileges and an email account and other privileges, and I don't want to in any way interfere with the flow of funding. So I have to be a little bit careful, and you will see that I don't flaunt these credentials very much. I don't talk very much about my Harvard association. I'm just Rudy Schild. and editor-in-chief of Journal of Cosmology. And um, um, I would say that I did an experiment recently to answer this question. We know that many people who have had UFO experience are confident that this is real and end up studying astronomy because they know there are astronomical implications. They know there's more to learn here. And just why is this happening to me? It's personal to them. And so in our American population, it's generally considered now that 15 to 20% of our population as a whole um, either have personal experience or a loved one, like a wife, has personal experience of UFOs. And so I have to have to ask myself, oh, well, how many people at my observatory have this experience? The Harvard Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics employs 350 PhD scientists. So if it's just 15 or 20%, that's something like, I think, 70 or 80. I don't do the numbers that fast anymore. But, if it's more nearly 50%, there might be hundreds here. Then I had a very interesting experience. I have a friend named Joe Cerletti who makes videos with me. And he visited me here in Cambridge and wanted to see the Center for Astrophysics building and see what it was like in there. I showed him what instruments we have and the globes that we've made that show the topography of Venus and the surface of Mars and all the fun toys and so on. And then up and down the hallways, people have their science posters hanging outside their doors that explain what their research in science is about. And I would explain them to him because these would have nice illustrations that arise in the astronomical sky. And when this tour was over and we were exploring other historic buildings in Cambridge, at one point he looked at me and said, "Rudy, did you notice that in most of the offices," and he used the word most of the offices, "there was only one or two books about real science, but always a book about UFOs."
Oh.
And I said, "Whoa, no, I didn't." Well, this was a Saturday. Most of the office doors were open, and means that I'm not here now. I'm home. I'm at home. Um, or I'm in the building. Actually, closed office means I'm at home. Open office door means I'm around here. Just look up and down the corridor, and I'll probably pop up, or I'm in the seminar room or something. So anyway, plenty of office doors were open to him, and he made that observation. Very interesting. So I tried it out. It turned out that we have a council called the Center for Astrophysics Council that is a kind of a go-between between the staff and the administration of the observatory. So in a church, as you know, you have a vestry. That's between the congregation and the minister and the diocese and so on. So I was nominated to be on this council. And I said, okay, we'll put this to a test. I will write my candidacy for being on this council as entailing my being interested in the UFO subject. And having authored the Free Survey book and other academic works regarding the UFO question, and I said, with the release of the public information that there are military pilots frequently having encounters with alien spacecraft, and there is an alien presence on Earth. The question before us is, will Harvard University be the first to offer a course and a program in UFO studies? Or will Harvard University be the last university to offer such a course? I propose to be the former, not the latter. Well, we had the election and I was voted down. I am not on the council.
Oh.
So I put it to a fair test, and that was the outcome. And it is for you to interpret that result, but you know all the facts that are relevant to the case now.
Bravo. Brilliant.
Well, I stuck my neck out
Yeah.
and got shot down, and I'm not upset. I didn't go have a drink. I didn't do anything.
Yeah.
I just said, okay, my colleagues have spoken, and that's good enough for me.
I shared in the Michael Salla interview that I taught one of the first ufology courses in the nation at Scottsdale
Yes,
Community
you
College.
did.
So I had the same experience, shot down. But shot down, yes, but things come back around. And I think that eventually we are going to see departments of ufology or touching on the topic
Yeah.
in universities. I think that it's bound to happen. But let's stay at Harvard here because now Harvard, as you well know, has the Galileo project in Avi Loeb, and it's they are doing astronomy and trying to physically identify UFOs. And he just had a recent, I guess, underwater exploration to find a piece of UFO material. And I was wondering that you, as an astronomer, were you called in to advise, and do you think that they'll go into consciousness, or what's?
No, there has
Okay.
been no contact here. First, I would like to say that if I were to be tapped to consult with another person, perhaps to teach a course on ufology, I would recommend that the Ray Hernandez book, that be a textbook for the course, because it is some of the um, academically secure and factual information about the subject. But maybe the general tone of the book and the conclusion of the book won't be to everybody's taste. So I offer that as a high recommendation that be considered as a very useful book, as a textbook.
That's excellent. And one of the reasons why I like it is because you worked with Edgar, and amongst this threat narrative, Edgar always held such a strong belief in pacifism and peace. And that's exactly what the free survey showed.
Yes, very much so. Now, I do want to make the record clear that there are some people at the, I think, 7 to 10% level typically, who have had negative experiences. So, like at home, so out there, there are some bad players. There is some bad stuff going on out there. And if you want to find and focus on that, then that can be your choice. But on the whole, the message seems to be go where the gold is, which is a peaceful universe, and a universe at peace through thought control and through the quantum field, through your being at peace with the universe and with its other occupants.
Beautifully said. So one last question I'd like to touch on, because I've held you for a while, and thank you so much. So when I worked with Edgar, I wrote a little ebook called, Exoconscious Humans Guide Our Spacefaring Future. And because you work with NASA and astronauts like Edgar, and maybe you've worked with other astronauts, and I'd love if you would share that also. But it always seemed to me logical. I mean, in a logical world, you would certainly want to have exoconscious humans involved in a space program, because computers break, communications break. We have telepathy. We can move around with teleportation. Some of us, if something breaks that's material, we can do psychokinesis and adjust it. We certainly have remote viewing abilities into the past and into the future. Edgar talks about the fact of, when the one, I forget which NASA flight it was, but they were having trouble, and he connected to it psychically and helped resolve some of the issues. But the most important thing, for the reason for experiencers being in the space community, is because we have contact with extraterrestrials and non-human intelligence, and we know how to move out into the universe. And I wondered about your thoughts about that. It would be a different space program.
In a very real way, the spacecraft operates the way a human brain does, and it operates within the quantum field. And when a physicist gets up on the TV again and again and says, well, we can't imagine that there are spacecraft visiting Earth because it takes so long at the speed of light to get here. But we know that through the quantum field and entanglement, communication is instantaneous. And in principle, the means by which the spacecraft gets here is by playing on entanglements that are built into the universe and through amplification of thought. And so you're absolutely right that the beam me up, Scotty, of Star Trek is conceivably possible. And so eventually in the space program, we will probably evolve a transporter. It's because all that has to be done is to establish the quantum connection between location A and location B that allows quantum effects to unite A and B through entanglement, riding on consciousness waves in the universe. That takes a lot of explaining and expansion, but in its simple essence, there is such entanglement possible. And so beam me from planet A to planet B is possible, and beam me up, Scotty, is in principle possible.
Thank you. I also wonder, because it looks to me, just as an outsider, that much of the space budget is going to robotics. So man or woman, space travel seems to be low. This is just my observation. I'm certainly not a professional in this field. Seems to be low on the priority. But I also know that natural human consciousness, I know that, Edgar and the things that he went through because of, his time in space, it's hard on the physical body. I'm not denying that that's not a reality. But I also know that there are quantum abilities or plasma abilities within natural human consciousness that becoming a spacefaring civilization can be a human endeavor, does not have to be all robotics. And I wonder what you think about that.
Yeah, very interesting question. And I haven't said this before. it's entirely possible that we look back to the practice of witchcraft, and traditionally it has been, if I can have a sample of the deceased person's hair,
Hair.
I can tune into their being and tell you what their spirit wants you to know or wants me to know. Now, why should it not be true that if we have space debris from a crashed spacecraft, or if we have human remains, or let's say alien remains from a crashed spacecraft like Roswell, then why shouldn't a attuned individual be able to communicate with that remote person over intergalactic space? It turns out that space means nothing. The quantum field pervades the universe. It's one universe, one quantum field. It's a hologram. And so I think that probably these kinds of thought experiments are going on. We don't know what they're doing with the Roswell crash victims at what is it in Ohio, the Air Force,
Wright-Patterson.
Wright-Patterson. What are they doing with the bodies that were removed from Roswell
What
and
happened?
other
What
crash
happened in
sites and
Dayton?
so on? Yeah,
I'm from
yeah.
Dayton, interestingly enough. I worked at Wright State University right next door to Wright-Patterson.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, so yeah, that's home to me. I know Dayton well. I know a lot of Dayton history, and
I
yeah,
have often thought of making a trip up to just visit the airplanes because I'm interested in aviation
the
as a kid.
Wright-Patterson
And
Air Force Museum.
yeah,
Absolutely. But the city itself, I mean, we could go on about Dayton, was just full of inventors back in World War II. And one of the neighborhoods I lived in, just up the street was the Runnymede Playhouse, and they were part of the Manhattan Project, and some house up the street from where I lived.
all right. We're out talking about personal experiences and Edgar Mitchell, and I would like to tell you
I'd
and
love
your
that.
Lizzie audiences something that Edgar told me and should be shared with the world.
Thank you.
He told me that yes, he was a graduate from MIT, he has a Doctor of Science. I think that MIT, being in the shadow of Harvard University, didn't want it to be a PhD, going back to the archaic Doctor of Philosophy, where you were a physical philosopher if you were a scientist, but just come right out and say, it's a Doctor of Science, damn it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we at Harvard University do acknowledge sometimes the technical college down the river.
Right.
Anyway, so Edgar has his PhD from MIT.
Mm-hmm.
He then became a military pilot and an astronaut, as you know. And he said at the end of World War II, he would then have been a young, I think, postdoc at University of New Mexico, Alamogordo. Um, and Alamogordo was right next to White Sands Proving Grounds. And the first thing that happened after World War II is we rounded up the rocket scientist, Wernher von Braun himself, plus others of them, and they were relocated to White Sands, where they were testing V-2 missiles left over from the Germans, brought to America, and Wernher was doing testing of them and demonstrating them and so on. And so when these paperclip scientists first arrived at Alamogordo, there was a reception for them at the university. This was a wine glass in hand meeting of the academic faculty of the University of New Mexico at Alamogordo and the newly arrived paperclip scientists. And perhaps some of them spoke English and some of the Americans spoke German. And they were all getting together and celebrating their arrival and how much they were welcomed in America, blah, 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 when a uniformed Air Force officer walked up to Professor Werner von Braun, tapped him on the shoulder, and said, "Extremely important phone call for you, Dr. von Braun." So, yes, the military officer escorted Werner von Braun out of the room. So he disappeared out of sight for 10 minutes. And Edgar said, 10 minutes later, he walked back ashen faced, white face, shaken with terror. That was the day after Roswell.
Wow.
Edgar was there. He told me first person.
Wow.
Yeah. That's
Wow.
a wow.
That's a wow.
Yeah.
It's so interesting how you working with Edgar and me working with Edgar. You know, when I lived in Dayton, my father served a German-speaking church, Otterbein Church in Dayton, Ohio. And Wright-Patterson was also where the paperclip scientists went and the engineers went.
Oh, I didn't know.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I bet that was afterwards then that the paperclip scientists and Werner von Braun in particular wanted to see the alien and who knows what. I mean,
Well,
you can
yeah, and
imagine.
General LeMay ran the base there at Wright-Patterson. I
Yeah,
remember him talking to Goldwater about what was going on, and you know, LeMay used a lot of profanities and basically told Goldwater from Arizona not to ask the question again. But yeah, I mean that the
yeah.
paperclip scientists, you know, they went to Dayton and they went to White Sands, and so no mistake. So yeah, it's all pieced together. Absolutely. And I think, you know, growing up, did I know paperclip people in my church? Probably. Why wouldn't I?
Why? Yes, you're right. Come to think of it.
Yeah. It was full of engineers. In Dayton, Ohio, the most prestigious club to join was the Engineers Club.
Oh, I didn't know.
Oh yeah.
No knowledge of that. Okay.
Yeah. So
Oh, very cool.
all very cool, and very cool how, you know, people just get placed in as experiencers. One of the things I recommend for my coaching is write your autobiography. Write about the places that you've been placed, because that's important. And when you do that, then you will see how you're a thread in this tapestry of, you know, now we call it disclosure, but you're a thread in the tapestry, as Edgar and I call it, the ET presence, because of where you were placed in your life. It's fascinating.
Rebecca, I have to bring you up to the 21st century. You don't write your autobiography. You make YouTube videos today.
You can make YouTube videos, but I'm still old school about that. I still believe that there's something amazing that happens in your brain when you write, when you actually sit down and write who you are and where you've come from. Speaking is one thing, but there's a critical thinking ability, you know, your prefrontal cortex or whatever. And there's an integrative ability that happens when you have that discipline of your hand and your mind and your brain all coming together with that. But yes, I agree.
Yeah, and you do make a serious point here, and that is that writing does have what you would call a rhythm of its own, where you're critical of yourself as you're going along. You're thinking about how will this be read in 20, in 100, and 300 years, and writing is a more disciplined and more, how should I say, intense approach, perhaps.
Well, that's why scientific papers are written. They're not done on YouTubes.
Uh, Absolutely true.
Yeah.
And in the scientific literature, there are no references to online products, only other book available published works.
Yeah. And so if we're going to take seriously the presence of experiencers on this planet, because I think that's an aspect that culture is going to have to deal with, is the presence of experiencers on this planet, experiencers, contactees, whatever you want to call them, that when we when we leave our legacy, I know the first book I wrote, that's how I wrote it. That was my exoconscious autobiography. And I kind of laid out my life in it. And I think it's one of the ways that we can maintain a very important legacy, just like a scientific paper. No, it's not a scientific paper, but for us to integrate what happened to us in our contact and in this culture and in this century that we're living in, where there's so much change, I think it's incredibly important. Thank you for I'm such a delight to get together.
Yes, I guess it's been overdue. Um, I've been not wanting to explore exoconsciousness from the human side as much as you, because I'm really tinkering around with the universe, and that's another thing that I'm unusually well qualified to do. Whereas the human side, there are plenty of people who do it much better than I could hope to, who have spent careers in psychiatric practice and are expert or like people like John Climo, the statistician, who is extraordinarily skilled at writing surveys and getting people to open up about the things that are most difficult for them to talk about. And for many people, their UFO experiences are perhaps less so today, and that's the good news. So that's why I haven't been on your doorstep as much as I would have liked to be, because while we're headed in the same direction, I'm always taking the tangents that are in the direction of science. And you're always taking the tangents that are in the direction of human experience revealed in psychiatric analysis.
Right. Such an honor to have you here and to discuss these ideas and for you to share your experiences with Edgar. It's just an honor, and I just feel like Edgar's presence is with us in this, and we're living his legacy. We're part of it.
He's smiling now.
I think so. Thank you, Rudy.
Thank you, Rebecca.